Privet, Katila, Wanning Ruski desu. So today I wanted to make a video on the nature of power and the pursuit of said power, and how, at least in the United States, we can gain power to push our ideas. Firstly, before we even talk about power, we must make one thing clear. Before you try to obtain power, you must first know what you are fighting for. What is the ideology you are trying to push? What are the goals, policies, or ideas you are trying to implement? Wielding power just for the sake of it makes you no different than an autistic retard, pardon my language, but it's true. Power is simply a means to an end, a way to enforce our will and do what is right. You must know in your heart why you are trying to gain power so you can justify yourself with it. As a little bit of a small example, if you wish, for example, to restrict immigration, the courts might get in your way, but if you use power to circumvent the courts for the goal of restricting immigration, then that is justified as implementing that goal is what is paramount. All power is first and foremost a way to achieve policy and see an outcome. Just getting power for no other reason than self-fulfillment is treachery and lousy. With that settled, we can now look at the nature of power and how it works within human societies. There are a lot of people who think power in and of itself is a bad or an evil thing, but I'm here to say that power is natural. It is what that power is yielded towards that matters, though. Like, for example, the state using its power to push homosexual transgender propaganda in schools is a horrible abuse of power, but using that same power to enforce value in school to push healthy national pride and family formation is a good virtue. They're still using the same power, but it's the yielding of that power to what ends is what makes it good or bad. So what matters is if the power is legitimate and what it is used for. As an example, I will give you this. Think of the power between a father figure and his children or his son. This is the smallest example of a power structure which can be expanded into a grander societal level. The father yields power over the children. He can tell them what to do, how to act, where they can go, etc. However, would anyone suggest that a father using his knowledge, experience, and power to help make children be, say, protected, become virtuous and moral and upstanding individuals, help them learn about the world, would they say this is a bad thing? This is the father yielding power in a way that is beneficial not just for himself and society at large, but ultimately for the children themselves. Yes, power can be abused, such as if the father uses his power to physically beat or abuse his children. But that is unjust power. But just because power can be unjustly used does not negate the existence of justified power. Now, obviously, there needs to be a striked balance that must occur. Obviously, no one, if you're a father, would micromanage every single inch of a child's life. Ideally, the child would act morally, do the right thing, and be a good citizen without the father figure telling them what to do every single inch of the day. So if the father does his job correctly, he actually wouldn't even need to wield his power. At least not only in the cases if the child starts slipping up and intervene to ensure he doesn't go off track. So ideally, it's like Aristotle's, or I don't think it was Aristotle, but it was like the lawgiver's art is basically making the lawgiver irrelevant. So basically, it's a balancing act. Allowing subjects some freedom is also healthy, by the way. It's just a matter of how much. As I mentioned, you don't micromanage, but also you don't be a hands-off approach. You're not going to let your child, smoke crack and drop out of school, for example. The more that the child shows that they are moral and responsible, the more you give them the ability to have freedom as you trust them. It's a delicate balancing act. If you spread it to a social level, this is how power works. It's not some materialistic social contract. For example, children don't stay with their parents because they calculate, in their brains, they're like, okay, well, in a materialistic way, this would help me better than if I ran off. No, there's a more spiritual level to it. They don't stay there with their families because it's good. That's just one part of it, but because they love their parents. And And at a national level, we don't just fight for our country, our families, and our communities or ideals because it's selfishly good for us. We do it because of higher ideals and more spiritual notions, such as love and dedication of duty to your nation, family, and community. So power comes about through the natural inequality amongst the people. And our desire for certain attributes and goals, such as safety and order, we give power to a body that can yield that power for justified ends. The justified being those attributes we want to achieve. By ourselves, we can do little in ensuring those, values, and ensuring that our country and community is orderly, safe, and happy. But with a state, we can yield power to enforce the values that we all want. But it is also important to know that we individuals play a big role in making our families, communities, and nations better. A small part, but a part nonetheless. The state is only as good in yielding power as so far as the people under it want those values to be enforced and value the same things. A strong state requires strong individuals, and strong individuals require a strong community or state. Now that we understand the nature of power and why we want it, we must look at a few ways to secure power in the United States. There are 4 ways which I have come up with which can help enforce the values and outcomes that we want. There is the populist wave theory, the entrenchment theory, the local theory, and the culture theory. The first theory is the populist wave theory. What this entails is basically you would use the wide appeal of the masses to lift you into power, and this can be done very well in a democracy. What you have to do is appeal directly to the frustrations of the people and channel it. And what you basically do is take the frustrations of the common man and appeal to those and see, and basically this, you have to focus on the problems that the people who are in power at the moment, who you're trying to get rid of, are not addressing. If you want something the public is not as hyped about or worried about, you try to make it a bigger problem. So, for example, if for the immigration example, if people are worried about mass immigration like they were in Europe after the mass migrant importation, then you appeal to that. However, if, say, you're a country that wasn't affected by it, you have to hype it up just to get people aware of it. Be aware of previous screw-ups of those in power, and so you can exploit it, and then basically exploit the populist discontent to that. Now, I will admit also that this populist wave theory has been done very well by populist parties. However, it's like the governing aspect, which they're not so good at. You can't just be the opposition party. You also have to, this is a good way to get into power, but there's many other ways you have to use when you're in power. But this is a very good way in a democracy to get yourself in power. In America, I recommend appealing to like a white identity, but the white Hispanic vote, and basically try to keep the other minorities, especially the black vote, from voting too much for the Democrats. Basically, you want to appeal to as much people as possible. You can't be explicitly, like, say, a white nationalist party, but you have to appeal where a common white worker understands, oh, you're for me, you're back me. It's like how a black person says, oh yeah, the Democrats are for me, basically. And I would also recommend being seen as professional and well-spoken. Someone who can connect with the people and address their issues, but is also well-articulate so that you can win, like, the suburbs. So in short, exploit weaknesses in the current establishment, appeal to people's identities and frustrations, and give solutions and have people behind you when you implement policy while you're in power. And also try to show your opponents as being extremists. And this will be most useful if, like, say, for example, we're running against a pro-reparations, pro-decriminalizing border crossings Democrat, for example. The next one is entrenchment theory, and it's basically what it sounds like. Basically, entrenching your power so that your policies pass even if you're not the one who's exactly steering the ship. And you basically try to exert your power in indirect ways. So this is a way to force your will without the populace knowing it. Because, for example, if what you want is unpopular, simply just seizing power and enforcing your will on everybody will cause rebellion, and especially if you do it at the wrong moment. So what are some ways you can entrench your power in the United States? First, you can appoint loyal judges who will rule your way if a dispute comes up. What's another way? You can appoint loyal and ruthless ideologues who agree with you into the federal bureaucracy, not just at the cabinet level, but also in the low-level mid-management positions, so that they can advance your agenda in the background. This is one of the fundamental flaws of Trump, is that he hired people who don't exactly agree with his fundamental agenda. Also, try to undercut your opposition. Make it harder in the United States, if I'm speaking as if I was a GOP, make it harder for minorities to vote. Institute electoral reform so that small parties can run and push the Overton window, basically. And use gerrymandering to basically get disproportionate representation. Now, if I had to be a bit fair here, I'm obviously talking from a conservative right-wing point of view. But however, for example, here's a Democrat way. Here's how a Democrat could entrench power. You can make it easier to vote so that Hispanics and Blacks can make it vote easier. You can make D.C. and Puerto Rico a state so that they could give you senators and get more power in the Senate. You could also try to appeal to minority identities, like Black identity, which is what the Democrats already do. So you could have like a loyal base of support. Also, another way you could entrench your power is push policies that do that. Things like limiting immigration, combating big tech censorship, allowing true freedom of association, allowing kids to go to private religious schools. These things and more will help you maintain power and gives power to those who are sympathetic to your cause, and basically to get legal backing to do certain actions to create certain outcomes. This is like, for example, you could create like an Orania, which is a South African Afrikaner only town in South Africa. So, for example, allowing free, if you in the federal level push for true freedom of association, because right now if you try to create that sort of town in America, you'll probably get shut down. But if you allow it in the federal level, people at the local level could actually use it, and with the power of the feds, they could start pushing real change at the local level. Local theory states that a person must, instead of thinking in terms of national or federal power, should instead try to seize power at the state or local level. The reason for looking at that smaller level is for practicality and ease of access. Getting power at your local council is much easier and puts you under the radar than if you were at the federal level. It allows you to have more power and influence over what happens in the federal, in your little town. However, this goes both ways. Basically, the effects that you push in this town or county or city are just felt within the confines of your town, county, or state, basically. If done correctly, local theory states you set your sights on sympathetic districts or counties that will vote for you. You have to take control of the school board, the local council, the sheriff's office, the district attorney, the superintendent, everything on the local level. All the local institutions, and basically it can't just be you. You have to get a bunch of other sympathetic people and use those members to take over the local politics and change it in a very real way. And you could do very good things that at the federal level you can't do. You can't at a federal level exactly exert so much. You have more power, but it's very hard to concretely see it in real life. What you could do is, for example, change the school curricula. You can enforce laws the way you want. Make it for example, you could either make yourself like a Second Amendment sanctuary, or you can crack down on illegal immigrants, for example. You could say, hey, we're not going to take down Confederate monuments, but instead create better museums that hold up the virtues of our nation. You could control public work programs and all these types of things. The amount of policies you can push is almost endless. So it's imperative that you foster an environment that doesn't attract too much attention as well, and that you should have allies. And basically, when you are in power in the local level, you also have to have a sympathetic national government. If, for example, if you're a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants and you actually have a real president who wants to cut funding from you, then that's going to harm you. But if you have a sympathetic president who's a Democrat, then he's not going to do that. So obviously, you could keep being a sanctuary city. And also, when you're in the federal government, this helps. You could get grants, and they could help you be better off. Like, for example, they could help you get funds for like healthcare and education. Ultimately, going local allows you to create the community, create the community in the state that you want. If you're a white identitarian like myself, you want towns and cities and counties reflecting white self-determination and allowing them to form and run their communities themselves without harassment. If you're a communist or a socialist, you might want to create your own mini communes, for example. However you want to see your ideal society be, it is much easier to create it and feel its effects on a local level than doing it nationally. The last theory is culture theory, which basically states that the ultimate way you gain and usurp power is by taking over the culture. What you do is you use culture to push the Overton window and slide your policies in, but in a subtle way to the audiences who won't be as polarized as they would be if you were talking just about straight politics, for example. Basically, what you do is through the spreading of authentic memes, taking over media institutions, you can spread your viewpoints and ideas, and you can spread them through such venues and mediums such as music, art, movies, gaming, etc. These are key to influencing and entering the culture. Some you might have to be more explicit in than others, such as in your music and art, while in movies or doing gaming playthroughs you can be a lot more subtle. It is often said that politics is downstream from culture, and if that is true, then to influence politics and thus get into power, you need to influence what is happening on the ground, and basically the culture. Along with this, we need to set up alternative institutions, such as alternative media, alternative banking, and alternative social sites if possible. The idea is if we rely on the current legacy institutions, then they can strangle us in our cribs before we rise. And basically, the way I would say it is infect the old institutions, take them over, and then also create new ones in parallel with them. If we create the culture, we are thus able to influence wider society. On a few extra notes, if you wish to obtain power, first you have to observe your surroundings. If you're running for a House seat, a Senate seat, or even a presidential seat, let's say you're running in the party that has already been in power for 8 years and is deeply unpopular. And let's say the opposition candidate is a competent and charismatic person. Running at that time would be foolish of you. You must find the right time to strike. Beside that, what about situations outside a political context? Things like a new costly war is going on, a worldwide pandemic, a disaster of some sorts, a huge corruption scandal, a personal scandal. You have to exploit these situations as they come to you to obtain power. Remember, through it all, the whole purpose of yielding power is to implement policy and influence outcomes, and do what is right. Thank you all so much for watching my video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you especially enjoyed it, be sure to check out my Patreon. Or just, send me just a few bucks on PayPal. So aim high, wander on, from America, with Russian love.